This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by MacRail. Equip your models with distinctive details that enhance your modeling. Check out their catalog of removable EOT devices, locomotive, and railcar detail parts at macrailproducts.com. And be sure to visit MacRail at Amherst in the Young Building, Area 79 near the food concessions area. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Joining us on the show today for the very first recording of both people being in the Around the Layout studio is Mark Herrick. Mark, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Ray. I'm glad to be in your studio, especially the first one.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. Been kind of thinking about this, and one thing we don't have to worry about tonight, hopefully, is any technical issues through the internet and whatnot. It's raining at a pretty good clip outside, so who knows what would happen. So we're recording directly to the board, so we should be good to go tonight.
Yeah, this should be cool. Looking forward to it.
So, and of course I'm moving around in a squeaky chair, so already starting to make noise. So let's do what we normally do. Let's start in the beginning and find out how Mark Herrick got into the hobby.
Okay, from the beginning, it sort of began when I was probably, I don't know the age I was. I think I was like 8 to 10 years old. I got an AHM, the whole package. At that time it was everything included. It was a whole set and snap track. Everything put together that way, and sort of ran that around the floor of the living room after Christmas type of thing. And played with that for quite a bit. And then I really didn't, have a lot of interest in trains. I don't know, other things, model cars and things came in a little bit. And then I think I was about 15 years old, and we took a trip out west with my sister and her husband, and we happened to break down and out in Montana, and it was right next to the BN, and that just really spurred me back into trains again. And I came home and built myself a small layout, 4x8 layout in my bedroom. So that's what's really got it going again. The juice is flowing again.
So you built the you taking all that influence of all that green out there in Montana with the BN, and then when you came back, so you built a 4x8 layout, just a circle going around kind of thing.
Yeah, a circle going around, a couple of switches into the middle of the 4x8, ran trains around, had the Plasticville buildings and stuff, and painted some roads on there, matchbox cars basically for the cars and stuff around, and played with that for quite a while, and then. Really didn't do much else, for a while with besides that. And then, had a good time, though, with that. That was a lot of fun.
I bet. Were you able to get any BN stuff back then, or was it kind of away from you a bit? Yeah,
I had some BN stuff. A couple of, like, F7s was a typical locomotive. You always found a Tyco, whatever, F7.
Sure.
And those type of things. And had some BN cars and stuff. And fortunately, back then, there was a hobby shop in Columbia. It was called Columbia Central Hobbies on Route 6 in Columbia. And the guy's name was Herrick that owned that. And I met him one day. We were going up to Hartford, and I saw the sign and I said something to my father, and he was like, "Oh, it looks like it's a hobby shop. We'll have to stop." So I stopped there and realized the guy had the shop right there in Columbia, which is, like 5 miles from my house, and spent a lot of time in that shop over the years.
Having a hobby shop that close now would be a little bit of trouble, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that would be tough on the wallet. I think I'd be in big trouble, actually. More trouble than I'm in already.
Be wildly convenient and a whole lot of trouble.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's for sure.
And he had a lot of, it was one of those typical old shops where all the kits, the Athearn kits, the roundhouse models, and all those model die casting kits were in the boxes on a shelf, and you basically went up to the counter and told him what you wanted to look at, and he'd pull it out and he'd open it up on the counter and take a peek. He had all the locomotives in a display case and everything. It was, really small, old school type of railroad shop, model railroad shop. But
probably very influential on you to be able to see it from, to have something that was more specialized in product offering, a hobby shop locally to kind of influence what you were doing.
Yeah, it definitely, took it in a different direction from, being at like KB Toys and stuff, which was
right.
the cheaper stuff, the Tyco and the HM stuff. And it was a different quality, not quite to the quality, that we're at today for sure, but it was definitely a step up, in that direction where it was more realistic.
Right. But you're still, you got this layout that's kind of continuous loop, and you've reached out with a hobby, shop, and from there, where did you start to get your idea for operations, and what was your first taste for that?
So I had met a guy in town. I'm in the volunteer fire department. I've been involved with that for years, and there was a guy in North Windham Fire Department that was a member of the Manchester Silk City Model Railroad Club.
Okay.
So I started just taking some trips up there into Manchester, and I got involved with that club a little bit, just learning about operations. And I really never did that. You know what I mean? Operations to me was like running a train around a circle and, switching a few cars out in the middle. But up there, we had the opportunity to really, run trains, and they used like a form of car cards and everything else. And it took in a completely different direction, something I was not accustomed to, but I really enjoyed. And that sort of set me up. And then while I was there, they were in the process of moving to a new building across the street. So we moved over there, and then the construction and everything else took place. So I started to learn a little bit about building a layout, and what that involved versus a 4x8, a sheet of plywood type of thing. So that changed everything.
Do you remember seeing it for the first time? Was it like a real shock to you to see this kind of, oh my goodness, you can actually do something more than just watch?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was amazing what, just the scenery and the elevation changes and everything about a completely built layout and then operating it like a real railroad. It was really a game changer for me. It took me in a completely different direction.
And like you said, timing is everything. When you get involved, they're already rebuilding bench work, so you get to see that firsthand.
Yeah, I stepped right in a time where it was building from the ground up and seeing the whole workings of the inner workings of a model railroad. So it was a good time. I wished really we had more time at the other place to be able to operate more, but I did learn a lot in the process of going up there, and being involved with that group.
When do you start to convey it back to what you have personally?
Well, I started to get an idea of where I could build a layout at my house because I had a small bedroom really, and I knew there wasn't much else I could do there. So I had a room in our barn, and I just to go into that, I live in the same house that I grew up in. I bought the house from my parents, so this room was upstairs in the barn, and I was looking at that room and I was like, I could probably build a layout out here. If I made the improvements to that room and insulated it and completed the walls and just did all the room preparation stuff that needed to be done, it would set me up good for a layout down the road. So that's what I started to do. I started to rebuild that room and make it into a train room.
What kind of layout did you build in there? I know that you had a idea from Silk City, and then some of that other. What else were you bringing into that room for a track plan? What was in your head about that?
So what sort of came into my head was we had gone up to my parents used to go to the boat shows and stuff up at the Hartford Civic Center, and there was a hobby shop at the Hartford Civic Center, and I saw this magazine, Railroad Model Craftsman, and I was like, hey, that looks cool. I didn't really even realize there were magazines, Yeah. And this was pre the Columbia Central Hobby Shop days. And so I bought the RMC, and in RMC, there was an article on the Virginian in Ohio, Alan McClelland,
Right.
And it just was like, man, this is amazing. And then reading the article, Beyond the Basement, and all these ideas and concepts that he had, even for a young guy, it was like, this is pretty cool. This is really where I'd like to see this go. So I really robbed his track plan in a lot of ways and built a single deck layout in that room using a lot of his track plan, changed around a little bit to fit the space. And I basically completed all that. Never really operated it too much, but I got to that point before I made some severe changes to that.
Yeah, let's talk about those severe changes, because I see you. They're interesting to take, because we know now you're in a, it's a double deck layout in a 20 by 24 room. So in the same room, but we've gone double deck now. Yeah. Let's get that out there. How did that happen to you?
So that happened to me. I joined the National Model Railroad Association, and I actually joined it as a junior member. So I was a member for the NMRA for quite a few years. I'd gone to the Boston convention, saw a lot of neat layouts, started to get really involved more with all these different layouts. And in 2005 in Stamford, they had a regional convention convention down there, and they had layouts and everything else there. Well, while I was there, we were in some of the clinics, and we were in a clinic with JMRI, which was a dispatching, a program for software for dispatching and controlling a layout. And I was always interested in that. And in that room was a guy named Don Iris, and he was talking all about JMRI and wanting to build a panel for his layout and everything. And he had a regular CTC type machine, so he wanted to make that jump into the computer control. And I was interested in the same thing. So I met Don through that clinic. We walked out the door, and I said, "Oh, you're from Rhode Island?" And he was like, "Yeah." I said, "That's close to me. That I'd like to come see your layout sometime." And he's like, "Absolutely." So. Exchanged email addresses and got an email from him inviting me to his next op session. And at that time, Don operated on every Thursday night. So ended up going up to his layout. And I'd always had this thing in my head that a double deck was like distracting, or it'd be distracting if you were operating. You'd be on the first level or the lower level, and then you had the second level like right in your face, and it would distract you from the first level. Or if you're working the second level, the first level would distract you. And I found that you're so focused on what you're doing on your particular level that all the other things in the room really don't affect you at all. It's just because you're so focused on what you're doing. And it completely changed me. And I basically went back to my layout, and I ripped it all out and double decked it.
So when you said you ripped the whole thing, so you completely cleared it, or were there any remnants from the first one left?
Yeah, there was bench work remnants. I mean, a lot of modification to the bench work, more of the shelf layout design. I had a lot wider bench work at the time, and so I brought things in closer to the wall, and I actually made it more like a shelf layout. It's still pretty deep in some spots, but it's definitely changed, significantly from what I first had. And it was definitely a process getting that changed over from a single level to a second level. There was a lot of structural things I had to do to make that all work, but I pulled it off.
When you were at one thing, I joke because obviously us being friends with Don and whatnot, and Don says he misses his old layout, and I joke back that nobody misses it more than me because I missed the entire thing. But tell me about his op sessions, because you had the opportunity to do that. Obviously, highly influenced it. Talk about his op sessions in Scituate and what it was like for an operator.
Yeah, his op sessions were really good. He had a lot of trains. He worked out of like 3 different yards, and there was the potential to, he ran interchange trains. He ran like interchange feeder trains that had to go from one yard to another to feed cars to that yard, to build trains in that yard. It was a whole system, a lot of locals. It was really awesome. And he had, I think at the time there was like 12, to 15 guys in there. So the way his room was, it was all split up into these sub rooms, these smaller rooms. So you really didn't feel like you were crowded in there because everybody was like in a different room doing their thing, and operating every week, it really changed, my ability and my level of the ability to operate, accurately and correctly. Because I went there the first night, and he was like, you're not just going to watch, you're going to operate a train. And I was like, oh boy, this is going to be something, because I really hadn't operated seriously anywhere. And, it was fun as far as, he was really easygoing about it, but I could tell everything was pretty serious on how he handled things. So it was just a little bit of pressure there, but, I learned it and I fell into it, and it was a lot of fun. It was a good time.
I know his operating sessions from somebody who didn't get to do it, but got to hear about it. He had a reputation for that. I mean, it was real, you had to know what you were doing. It wasn't, I know he was easygoing, fairly easy with the new operators, but I mean, it's an intimidating place. I mean, I just walked around the place and it was intimidating. So it must've been, a lot of pressure feeling to get involved with something that was running really like a well-oiled machine on a weekly basis too.
Yeah. It ran so many times too. And, and he expected, if you had been there a while, he expected you to know the jobs, you know what I mean? You had different trains and everything, and they did all different things. And he expected to know, that, you went to Cranston and you switched out these industries, and you went to, Providence and you switched out these industries, and you were, he expected you to know what you were supposed to be doing, after you've been there a while. And there was always operators that were a little shaky, they've been there for years and they were a little shaky, but for the most part, everybody knew what they had to do. And then, when he actually decided to break me in on the dispatching, it was on the old board with all the toggle switches and the lights and things. And he said, "Would you like to learn to dispatch?" And I was like, I'll give it a try, So I sat and watched that done. And then when I actually got the dispatch, you talk about stress when you first go there. It was like, oh boy, I'm going to be dispatching this thing, And
Right.
He says, "No, I'll be right here with you. You got any questions, just ask, But that was a couple of times doing that. The first couple of times were pretty intense.
Was that the first time? Was Silk City like that with the dispatcher, or was this kind of the first time you had kind of handled operations at that kind of level?
Yeah, they really didn't do it like that at Silk City. And to be honest with you, I know they didn't have like a CTC machine over across the street when they were in the basement there, and that's basically where I did most of my operating. And I think there it was more or less like, you can go between these 2 points type of thing. You've got clearance between two points or something to operate. But it was a completely different thing for me to see that operation, and that level of it. And then when he computerized, it actually made it easier to operate the layout. And Ed Jouer, one of his regular dispatchers, ended up moving to Georgia, and that's when we sort of split off into that, remote dispatching thing, which he did towards the end.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that for a minute, because that's kind of a neat feature that's now gone on to your layout, and then back to Don's and his new location down in Sebastian, Florida. Talk about that for a bit. How that setup of having a dispatcher that's not even in the room, not even in the same state, running a railroad.
Yeah, I think it just takes it to that next level where you almost feel like you're operating a real railroad, where the dispatcher's not there with you. With a dispatcher, sometimes as a dispatcher, when you're in the same room, you can sort of cheat. You can look over the top of the monitor and peek and see what's going on.
Right.
But when you're remote, it's all on that screen, and what the people have told you, and it just changes it. And when Don moved down to Florida, I had gone down to help him out down there, and he said, I'd like to build a panel that I have JMRI CATS that runs my layout. So what Don does for my layout is he comes into the computer using VNC, which is a program basically that allows a remote control of your computer. So he's basically controlling my computer to do all the dispatching on my screen, on my software. And then we communicate right now using Skype, but we're thinking of, converting over to doing something different there. That's something we're working on right now. And then what happened with Don is after I built this panel, it's become the same thing for him. I've been able to start doing a little dispatching for him now in a remote thing. So it's neat, to see it come full circle for me, especially where we did it for my layout. Now we're doing it for him.
Yeah, I want to get into a little detail on the radios too, because it's really a neat thing. And, we're talking about as a group, potential using even more technology, but still in its day, still pretty advanced to be able to do that. So let's talk about the radios a little bit and how that worked.
Yeah, so the radios, so basically, you're hooking a radio up that's on a Vox, an open frequency, and you're plugging that into your computer. So when you talk on a family radio, FRS radio, you're basically just talking through the computer, and Don is down in Florida and hearing everything you transmit over that family radio. And so every time you talk, there's a little delay there, but he picks it up, and then he talks back to you, and it comes back through that computer, and you're picking it up on your end. So the computer just acts as that connection, that long-distance connection. But we've had some difficulties with that. There's been a few, the FRS radios are definitely not, they're sort of dated in their technology, I think, and
Yeah, using them, basically you're using the radio as the microphone and headset for the computer, and it's, then broadcasting out on whatever frequency you've chosen. So yeah, it's definitely but for back then, and this is how Don was doing his, right, in Scituate.
Right.
So, I mean, it's still a wild idea. It isn't, pick up and dial a 9-digit phone number to talk to this person. It's over an internet connection, and, still being able to use the radios and basically do what a lot of the big ones are doing now with remote dispatch centers.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, Don's layout, what happened with us at the end there was when Ed had moved down to Georgia, we split the layout like in half. So like the lower level was maybe the dispatcher that was sitting in his room in Scituate, yep. And the upper level was Ed down in Georgia. So we had like we were on channel 6 for the bottom and channel 10 for the top, and then we would share a radio frequency between the two dispatchers. So what would happen is on the helix between the two levels, basically, Ed would call me if I was dispatching and, say, north dispatcher to south dispatcher, I've got one coming up the hill to you or whatever, and, can you take them? Yep, send them up the hill, we'll take them, so you would be able to communicate dispatcher to dispatcher and pass trains back and forth. So it was a pretty neat system, the way we had it set up there, and we've just continued that system in, a sort of simpler way, even here. But it's also Tony Donatelli's, Western Maryland layout. Don's able to dispatch that layout. It's not the CTC type of control, but he does have turnout control and basically uses it, on that, basically the point-to-point type of thing. You got clearance from this point to that point or whatever. It's not signaled. So, but it's still, remote dispatching, which is pretty cool.
And just having the dispatcher in general and on a layout, what you talk about bigger layouts like yourself and Don's layout in Scituate and Tony's, but I mean, I've got a small layout and we're doing dispatching on that as well. And it's just, it's about control. It's about just setting it up and making it somewhat realistic. You don't have the whole railroad. You only have a portion of the railroad to work with, and it kind of keeps you in that. It keeps it in check, by having that operation, that dispatch to it.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got your limits. You've got your limits, just like the railroads. They've got limits to a certain point, and that's you've got to work within those points and do your job.
Right. I want to get back to the relationship with Don, because obviously you talk about the influence of it. So you meet him in Stamford in 2005. You talk about going over to his layout. When does he get to see your layout, and what version does he get to see first?
Well, he did come over. He asked what I had basically after we met, and after I'd been there a few times over in Scituate, and he did come over and took a peek at what I had, the original. So it was that one level. I told him what I was trying to do, and he was like, this layout would be perfect for 2 decks. You should 2 deck it.
He's such a bad influence, isn't he?
He created a lot of work for me.
In a good way. He's a bad influence in a good way, right?
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he took it to a whole nother level for me, and literally,
Yeah.
And it just, because I did want that running room. I really, one of the concepts I always had in my head was to have the switching areas and then have some type of dead space, some type of scenery in between those switching areas, and get that feeling of not, you're in this town switching and the front of your train's in the next town type of thing. I really wanted those gaps between, and double decking it has really been able to allow me to do that. It's still pretty a tight layout, but I have that opportunity now to do that.
So you make a decision, you're going to modify this layout, you're going to go double deck, but in your mind you've got a railroad already picked out.
Yeah, I did have a layout picked out. After having that trip out west in '76 and BN and everything else, I was like, I want to really model the West. That's where I really want it to be. I just fell in love with the mountains and the pines and that whole look and feel of the BN in that area. And they were already starting to talk about transitioning into buying the Santa Fe at that time and merging with Santa Fe, basically, and becoming BNSF. And I knew I just wanted to take it right along wherever they went, basically go with them. And so I'd spent some time out west. I took several trips with my family out west, and we went out to the Northwest quite a few times, and my daughter ended up living out there. Actually, she lives in Bozeman, Montana. So I do take a lot of trips to Montana, and so the influence is always there. And I just like the frequency of the trains and that the funnel area of Sandpoint, the Northern Tier, all that things that the BNSF offers in that area. It's just a lot of trains, a lot of frequency of action, and just the different types of trains too. It wasn't just like a intermodal route. It wasn't like the Transcon's great down in the south. Everybody talks about it, but it's just intermodal train after intermodal train. But at least on the northern tier up through Montana and stuff, you still get those mixed freights. You get a lot of different, a lot of diversity of trains, and I really wanted that.
Yeah, it's a super speedway of trains, but it certainly doesn't hurt that it's going through some really picturesque scenery too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's some beautiful country up there.
What would you say your favorite place is out in that area? Like if you were going to just, be dropped off right now, where would you want to be in that area?
I would say probably in the Whitefish area, somewhere in that area, because Whitefish is really, it's a nice spot. And there's a lot of nice train watching spots to see it. That the track basically follows Whitefish Lake and everything else, and there's a lot of nice area to do some rail fanning and stuff. So the Whitefish, but I'll tell you, it's really hard to find a bad spot out there. There's really a lot of nice. Essex is beautiful too, through the mountains and stuff. But
yeah. And you've been able to start to convey that. So when you've got the idea you're going to do it, did you know that where you were going to end? Because let's talk about that a little bit. How your layout translates over the Montana division.
Yeah. So what I did is I started in Spokane, Washington, which is really the hub of the action going west, so to speak. From the BNSF, it all funnels into that Spokane area, and it either goes south into Pasco or goes the northern route up into Seattle. So that's sort of like the fork in the road, so to speak. So I decided that was going to be my western end. And when I originally had the single level layout, it was just going to go to Whitefish. And when I double decked it, I said, well, if I'm going to, now I got to pick another terminus on the east end. So I researched it quite a bit. I looked at a lot of different things, and I came up with Shelby, and Shelby being a crew change point at the time. So Shelby was an area that they used to crew change, so it would be a good area, I thought, to have like a staging yard and everything else, because the trains would be sitting there. These full trains would be sitting there, and that could be a visible staging yard. So I said, yeah, I'm going to do Shelby. So in between Shelby and everything, I got different towns. I got Essex, and I've got Cut Bank, and, I've got East Glacier. And so it gave me the opportunity to do some snow sheds and things like that. And those are really there's some cool areas that I definitely wanted to model.
Yeah. What were the kind of the must-haves of seeing when you were out there? And you talk about the snow sheds. What else? Yeah.
Snow sheds, Two Medicine, Trestle. That's like, if anybody ever goes out on the BNSF out that way, it's like Two Medicine. Everybody seems to have a picture of that area. So that was a must-have. Some of the tunnels, they have a lot of tunnels along the Flathead River and the Kootenai River. That's another area. There's a lot of tunnels along that area. So I wanted some tunnels. And Flathead Tunnel at one time was the largest tunnel in North America. And so I wanted to have Flathead Tunnel in there. So I've got that. Whitefish, of course, I wanted to have Whitefish in there as a yard. So there was quite a few, I guess, what do they call it, givens and druthers or whatever. You have all these different things you come up with. And I sort of made the list, and what I wanted to have. And some of the things operationally, I wanted to have really broad curves if possible. I wanted to try to have number 8 turnouts on the main line, nothing smaller than number 6. Code 100 rail was fine with me. I felt I could hide it with paint and whatever, those type of things. So it just, it just went from there, all those different things, and trying to fit everything in and where it's going to work, and I've really tried to focus on, making the scenes work,
Well, one thing I know, that one of the scenes that you've done with your snow sheds in the Continental Divide is right as you walk in. It couldn't have been placed any better. I mean, it just ends up being what I think, and would you agree that's your kind of your signature scene, is the snow sheds as you walk in and see that. So, was that planned, or was it just a good happy accident?
Yeah, that was really a happy accident. I started to, when I built the layout and I started to do elevations, because there is elevation changes, and Summit is truly the summit. The railroad goes 2 different directions in elevation from there. So when I planned it and getting the towns and where everything was going to be, it ended up that was Summit. And then when I was looking at it, I was like, this would be an ideal spot for a snow shed, and that would be the signature scene really on the layout when you walk through that door.
Yeah.
So it just sort of happened that way. So when I scratch built the snow shed there and built that into the scenery and into the backdrop and everything that I had, because I had some photos from out there, it was like, everything worked perfectly. It just all came together.
Yeah, and just that whole scene, and then you've really taken a lot of what you captured in Montana and started to apply it. It's really neat when you walk your layout and know that these are real places.
Yeah,
and conveying that.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges to that? It's you've been out there, you've seen it, but to try to convey it onto an HO scale layout, what are some of the challenges of that?
I think the biggest challenge is it's just, I don't know if you want to call it like big out there. It's big. It's like everything around you is just so massive. The mountains and the trains are just so minute compared to the whole scenery, everything around them. And that's always bad, because even on a shelf layout, you've got maybe 18, 20 inches or whatever. It's hard to really sometimes convey that, the size, the enormity of the mountains and how close they are to the trains and everything, and really give that feel. So that's one thing I've always struggled with, is making sure my backdrops and everything that tries to just minimize the trains, so to speak, because they are really minimal in that scenery. So that's one of the things that I've really struggled with. The other thing is just getting everything to fit, everything to sort of come together. It's proto freelance, because a lot of the towns, there's very little local switching, in that area. And I do have a lot of local switching, which, I've sort of made it up, of what's actually going on in different towns and stuff, because I want to make the layout interesting. Operations is my thing, and so building everything into it to make it where it's, operationally accurate, so to speak, and fun, was a challenge, because I had to sort of make up these industries and these switching areas where, like Cut Bank, a few little areas where you're going to switch and what the industry would be. And, in East Glacier, there's very little industry in East Glacier, but I had to have something there to switch, to make it operationally fun. So a lot of it's proto-freelanced, but by the same token, a lot of these towns and these areas, are there, you know what I mean? A lot of these things that you see are there, and I had a photo that I had posted up on my my Facebook page, and a maintainer he was actually the supervisor of maintenance assigned out of Essex, and there's a sign on my railroad that says Summit, and it says Summit, Montana, and it lists the elevation or whatever. And he saw that sign. It was a picture I took right there by the snow shed. And he was like, you got that sign there? I'm the guy that put that sign there. I'm the guy that put that sign there the first time. He says, and that's great. I love it, So to be sort of, this guy to come up and say that he saw that, and, it just makes it all the better. That's what I've always wanted, somebody to say, hey, I know where that is. I've seen that, so that was cool.
It authenticates it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes it feel like it's the right thing. You've done, you've brought Montana to Windham, Connecticut and put it in your barn.
Yeah. That's really that was a huge compliment to me. I really appreciated that.
So kind of getting back to this, we talked about, we got this, your layout, you're going from, was it Shelby to Spokane, Washington. And, but you kind of have that in your head, but when Don comes over, he sees this single thing. Now you got the double decked, and you've got your 2 points. What kind of then you got to do a helix, and talk about your helix, because that's kind of a neat thing too, because where it's located.
Yeah, well, the helix was definitely an issue. That was a tough in the room. That was going to be a tough one. I looked at the room, and I really didn't want to lose a lot of layout for a helix. And I struggled with that. I looked at different places. I came up with all different kinds of ideas, and I'd invited Don over and a couple other guys over to get, just hit them up and see what they thought. And one day I was out there looking, and I was like, I think I could put this helix outside the room. There's a room, as you come up the stairs, it's on the second floor of the barn, and as you come up, there was like some open space on the left. And I was like, I think I could shoehorn a helix in that area. It would just involve a couple of doors, small doorways to the layout. They come out, and go through the helix and just go back in those little doors, get back into the room. So I did some figuring and did some calculations. There was a great program available online about helix and radius and elevation changes and each deck, measurements between decks. It was a great tool. So I was able to use that and basically design the helix and put it in that space. So as you come up the stairs, it's on the left, it's outside the room. You come through the door and you're standing in the layout room, and there's a small backup camera. I was trying to think, one of the issues I had always with the helix outside the room is, in the winter it gets cold outside of that room. The room's heated, but the rest of the barn, of course, isn't. And, right. You always get those people that want to peek, they got to look, sort of they're opening the door and they're looking at the train, they're shutting the door, they're opening the door, looking, So I was like, I got to stop that somehow. And, one day one of the guys, Mike King, says, did you ever think of a backup camera? And I was like, no, I never did, So I said, I'm going to look into that. So I looked into a, cheap backup camera from Amazon or somewhere, and I mounted that backup camera, and it works great. So it's right there on the wall. It's not a very big screen, but, you can see your train and everything. So the guys watch the screen. Nobody's opened the door. It's great.
Yeah, it definitely helps, and then now when the summer, keeps the AC in the room, keeps the heat in the room, and still allows you to, for those that don't believe, at least be able to watch the train go around and come back to you. So
yeah, absolutely.
When was the layout to a point where you could operate on it? So you took it down, 05, so whatever. So when was it where you could start to hold operating sessions on it? Yeah,
we started operating, I think, in like 2016, pretty regularly. So we've been operating on that for quite a while now. Basically, my idea was to just get all the bench work done, get all the main track in, get all the turnouts in, get everything in, and then do the switching areas and basically run it. I wanted to run it as much as possible prior to getting too involved in scenery. If I had to make changes, I wanted to make changes then. So I think I've operated just a little over 50 operating sessions right now. And it's just to go through the problems, try to figure those areas out. There were a lot of adjustments, a lot of changes. That turnout's not in the right spot. I got to move this one. I got to make a crossover here, there. There's even one change now. I have to think about. We may have to change a crossover to make it the opposite direction than what it is, because it's not working really the way it should have. So it was just doing that, getting it operationally, and fortunately, I had a good group, to work with. That was a big thing.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. So you're starting to operate in 2016. Prior to that, and prior to even meeting Don in 2005, would you have considered yourself kind of that lone wolf up there building your layout?
Yeah, absolutely. I never really intended, when I started building that layout, in my own mind, there was never ever an intention of having a group come up and operate it. I figured, there may be me and a friend or something like that. We'll operate the trains or whatever. Or I'd go up there and operate it by myself. There was never really anything in my mind where it would be a group of people, and that really changed after meeting Don and seeing that, there's guys that do this stuff. There's groups that go around, and Don had a pretty good core group that really, was like, yeah, this would work,
Yeah, so... his is in Scituate, Rhode Island. So the distance, for those that don't know, like between Scituate and Wyndham's, what, about 45 minutes or so?
Yeah, 45 minutes or so. Yeah, it's not that far.
So it's within a relatively, it's easy, not, it's not unquestionable to travel. It's a pretty easy, for me at least. I think 45 minutes is pretty
yeah,
easy.
I think anything an hour, close to an hour is pretty reasonable.
Yeah, and it's all on Route 6. It's it's all fairly well connected.
Absolutely.
So you have this group that Don's operating with. How many I think he had a lot of operators.
He had a lot of operators. He was like 15 people, I think, at one time. And like I said, it was every Thursday, so that there was a lot of operations there.
And he was running every week. Now, before you were able to run, was there anybody else running along with Don within that group?
Not really at the time. And then what happened was Don determined that he wasn't going to operate every Thursday. He sort of changed his tactics of, it was a lot to get the layout ready every week. And I think he was realizing the amount of time. And then I think also that he started to see that there were other guys that had layouts, available to operate on, and that maybe we should diversify a little bit and start getting maybe out to see these other layouts and operate these other layouts. But by the same token, we knew that these other layouts weren't going to accommodate 15 guys. So we sort of had to pick and choose, who was going to go. And it really wasn't a choice of picking and choosing, but it was the other guys that had layouts, that were building layouts or whatever, that had stuff, and basically making that sort of like a subgroup of Don's operating group.
Right. So that's kind of where. So who was the one of the first ones that you'd say outside of Don that you guys started operating with?
Tony Donatelli's, the Taggart Valley, Western Maryland. We started going over to Tony's, and we basically did like a Thursday at Tony's, and then we were doing Don's, and then a couple other guys, started in. I was involved in building mine at the time, and then Mike King was starting to build a layout up in his attic of his house, and and then you got involved, and so It's just expanded from there.
Yeah, what's really neat about it, and I've come in a lot later into this thing that we call the Tri-State Railroaders in the operating group. So it's neat to hear the history of it, because I joined again right in that time. Don's layout had gone down, so we had Joe Grissetti, who just recently passed, but great memories of Joe Grissetti's layout. He had the New York Central that we were operating. I think that may have been the first time I operated with you guys, was at Joe Grissetti's.
Probably, yeah.
And then you said, I got to come over and see yours. I saw yours, blown away. And then Mike King. It took me a long time to get up to Mike King's. Like every single time Mike King would invite me, there would always be some kind of school function or whatnot, but I finally did up to Mike King's, and and then it's picked up other members along the way. Those we've interviewed, Joe Mammy, and we've had obviously Mike King on the show, and we've talked to him, and we've had others that have kind of guested at time to time, from like Kyle LeBlanc. But how did that that kind of idea, that Tri-State Railroaders thing, where was that kind of born?
Well, to be honest, the Tri-State Railroaders, because my wife said to me one day, she says, Facebook's a good platform to come up with something, and she says you should make a group, or something on Facebook where you guys could communicate back and forth, and you're more it was a more organized group on Facebook. And I was like, what can we call ourselves? So I started throwing these names around, and the Tri-State thing is pretty common in Connecticut, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. There's a lot of different organizations and groups that use that. Fire department, Tri-State, there's different things. So the Tri-State thing made sense because we were Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, basically. And then the last part of it, the railroaders, Tri-State Railroaders, that sounds cool. So I passed it by Don, a few others, I think Tony or whatever, and we said, let's go with that. So we sort of made up this name and started a Facebook page, and we named Tri-State Railroaders, and we basically put it out there. If people wanted to join the group, they could join up and, become a part of this, small round robin, basically, group of railroaders.
Yeah. I'll tell you what I've mentioned this many a times, but mentioning here on the podcast that what's really neat about the Tri-State group and the people that are involved in it, it's like a club, but it's not. It's like we all know each other, we all relate to this name, but the head of the club is the guy that's running the layout that week.
Yeah.
Right. There is no, head of the club. There's no politics. There's no, it's everything you would hope a club could be without being a club. It's just a great group of guys who kind of, they help each other. Hey, it's funny that everybody seems to have an expertise.
Yeah.
It works out well. Like this guy really knows, like Mike King's the 3D printing guy, and Joe Mammy's the track planning guy.
Yep.
And, ops and dispatching and JMRI, and Don's the group expert, right? He just knows about, he's got a lot of topics covered, but he's the guy that goes for decoder problems, ESU, locomotive issues. Everybody seems to have a really great thing to offer the group, and it just makes it really cool.
Yeah, it does. And I think what makes the group so interesting and so fun is that, like you say, we don't have bylaws, we don't have dues, we don't have any kind of hierarchy or political type of things going on or whatever. There's no politics in it, really. It's just a group, like you say, of guys that are interested in having a good time, helping each other out, And, when the operations come up, going to each other's layouts and, carpooling and conversation and all the different things we do. And even beyond that is, going to, a restaurant a couple times a year all together and doing things together. I had the group over one time. We had a tree making party at my house, and I had, a picnic when, I got the grill out. We made hamburgers and hot dogs and everything else. And, we just had a good day and making trees for my layout because I knew I needed hundreds of trees. I mean, I'm Montana, that's all there is pine trees. It's pine trees everywhere you look. And so it was fun, and it was the tri-state group that came over and supported that, and I just think it's a really neat group that's really evolved into, just being buddies and just enjoying the hobby together,
Yeah, we're all seemingly like-minded. We have a very similar idea to what operations should be, the level of seriousness you want to take it. Everybody's kind of on that same thing of let's try to do it right. But if you don't do it right, we're not going to throw you out, and we're not going to take you out back, or we're not going to do any of those kinds of things. We're a learning group. We want to learn with each other, and we love to teach each other, or whatever it is. I don't do a lot of teaching, but I do a lot of learning, and it really has. It's just a really cool thing that's happened. And, through the podcast, I've mentioned it many a times with other guests of those that are lone wolves. And listen, you build your layout for you, but it's so cool to share it with other people. Absolutely. And have them come over. You shared it quite a bit recently. You had the Nutmeg group. They did they had the regional, right? It was
regional, convention.
So talk about that. How was that to have a bunch of people come in and see your layout, and then you had a whole group of new operators?
Yeah, it definitely put me under the gun to try to get some stuff done. There's nothing more pushing to building a layout or getting something done than having people come over, especially new people. If it's just the tri-state guys, it's a little less pressure, I guess, on you because they've been there, they know what to expect. And, you always try to have something new for those guys to see. But when it's a whole new group, it's like, I just almost overpressured myself to try to get stuff done. The lower level was pretty much open bench work. And I said to myself, I was determined. I was closing in all the bench work. So it involved basically getting all the scenery, the roughed-in scenery done, all the plaster cloth, all the landforms, everything done, getting a coat of brown paint on all that so there was nothing stark white sticking out. Just dressing up the room, getting a skirt around the bottom of the layout to hide all those things, that people don't need to see, all those unbuilt kits and everything else I got under the bench work,
Right.
And then put some decent floor, some nice heavy padding down on the floor so it's a little easier on your feet, and walking around. So that created some pressure to get that done. But, now when I go up there and I look at it, and that's like, I'm so glad that it pushed me to do that, And I had a nice group of operators. I had one op session, and Don dispatched. Don was fortunate. I was fortunate enough that Don was able to come up from Florida, and he really wanted to go to the convention, and he came up and he dispatched for me and helped me out that way. And I had other guys, come over and help out. You were there. Different people came over and helped out with a lot of things. Yeah, I know you really helped me out a lot with speed matching because that was one of the things that everything ran good and the locomotives ran good. So everybody sort of pitched in. The whole group pitched in different ways. And, we got the thing going, and the op session went off without a hitch. And then I had a couple of days of open houses and stuff and had, quite a few people come through. The convention was located in Windsor, which is sort of the central corridor of Connecticut, the 91 corridor. And I'm a little bit east of that, so I really wasn't on the direct path for everybody. So, I think I would have had a lot more visits. I was a little closer to the Hartford area, but, being 35 minutes, 40 minutes from Hartford, it really wasn't that far to truck out to see my layout. So I had quite a few people stop in. So that was a lot of fun. It was interesting and meet a lot of different people, new people. I actually met a couple of guys that will probably, be operating on my layout again. So
yeah, that's definitely great to be able to do that and get new people to see your layout and get different reactions and whatnot. And I'll tell you one thing, we talked about the like-mindedness of the tri-state guys, and one of the things that you carry through in your layout is that, the scenery is great, and the work that you've done, you might call you, modest Mark. Your scenery work is phenomenal, and but beyond that, the trains just run really well, and I think all of us are in that same mentality of, the scenery can be great, but if the trains don't run right, you've just built a diorama. You haven't built a model railroad. So we've really drilled down on that. And I know that's one of your high priorities too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, you can't, to me, you can't have operations if it doesn't operate well. Operations is not where you've got to reach down and, push a train halfway around the layout or something. I've been to op sessions like that. I've been at layouts that operate that way. And, it's one thing you have a problem. And then unfortunately, every time, you have a convention or you have people invited over or you decide to open up on a Saturday for an op session for an out-of-town group or whatever, it seems like that's when all these gremlins pop up and everything else, and you have those moments. But when you go to somebody's house and it operates that way, on a Thursday night, and then you go back, a month later, because that's how the cycle basically runs, and you're doing the same thing at the same spot, it's like, there's really, no excuse for it. What I do is I keep a list, of any problems I have with cars, with locomotives, with track, with whatever's going on. As a guy, I tell everybody, say something to me. I want to know, and I'll keep a list, and it's a priority. After everybody's gone, I mean, even after that night, on a Thursday night, everybody's leaving. I keep saying Thursday night. We're Wednesday nights now.
It's one of the nights, and maybe it'll change back. Who knows?
I can't get out of that habit. But,
right.
But anyway, it's like I take that list and I'm like, I got to fix this stuff, and it's got to be fixed for next time because I'm not going to have the same problem, Yeah. And but it's like you said, you want the things to operate well, and that was one of the things when I was doing track work. I like doing track work, and I was like really adamant, about filing points, really sharp and really getting things, joints between rail, good, and everything's, in the same plane. It's in the plane, left to right, up and down. It's in the same plane. There's no big bumps there. I really put a lot of effort into getting things right with a track gauge and all the different things necessary to make that happen.
We talk often on the show, and it seemed like we were going on a streak, and I hope and nobody took offense to it because it seemed like we were picking on larger layouts because we just kept going on this streak of smaller layouts. But I would not call yours a smaller layout. I would call yours probably in that medium to it's not I wouldn't say super large or whatnot, but it's still it's a fairly decent sized railroad. I mean, double decked in a 20 by 24 room. Is a good size layout. What do you find some of the challenges of? I mean, it's purely rewarding to be able to run what you do, which is emulate the traffic on the High Line. But that's a lot of railroad to take care of. What are some of the challenges that you face doing that?
Well, there's a lot of challenges actually. If you've got a small layout, it's easier to clean, and everything else. So every time between op sessions, when I'm getting ready for an op session coming up, I basically have to go out there for 2 or 3 hours and clean track and everything else. And there's a lot of track to clean, and it doesn't just mean the main line. You got to get in there and, do all those switching areas, all those turnouts and everything else, get everything cleaned up. So as switchers go into work and they're going slower than the main line traffic. So if there's going to be a problem, it's going to be there.
All right.
So you really got to get in and do all that. And then it's just the maintenance, cars, low couplers, a coupler missing, whatever. There's always something. And then the engine, the locomotive roster. I mean, I've got close to 60 locomotives, so it's keeping that all tuned up, wheels cleaned, a lot of that. There's definitely a lot more maintenance involved with the layout my size versus, a small layout. But like you say, it's a trade-off. You've got to accept that if you want the look and the feel of what I consider the BNSF, where I model it, I've got to go that direction, and I've got the room to do it. So why not?
Yeah, for yours, a switching layout just would never really cover what you're doing. It's got to be that size to. I mean, you got a lot out there, and like you said, you've compressed already to get what you have now. So it definitely needed to be a larger layout. And you were aware of kind of those challenges because I'm sure Don had kind of told you that as he's, what he had to do to maintain his P&W layout in Scituate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a lot more work that, and I always said to myself, if I ever downsized, I think if I ever downsized, I would go to like a steel mill layout, where it's like maybe one huge industry with a whole lot of switching and, moving cars from here to there or something, something where, it's just like a condensed area and just a lot of switching because I enjoy switching. I mean, I like the mainline traffic. I like to watch it, but the switching is what does it for me, and I really enjoy that part of it. So And I'm sure someday that, that probably will come, a downsize.
Well, I can speak on behalf of the Tri-State Railroaders that we're not ready for you to downsize yet. In fact, we were, talking about the time that you spent, and you actually held off on operating sessions for quite a few months as you were, you had all this stuff laid and, stuff covering the track, and you were doing all this scenery work. So I don't know if we were more heartbroken by missing the op sessions or your wife Susan's treats that she gave us every once a month. I think she's the group leader when it comes to that.
Yeah, right. I know. That's what I always say to you guys. I say I don't know if they really want to. I tell her that. I don't know if they're actually coming over here to run trains. I think they're just coming over for the desserts you offer sometimes.
I think sometimes it's a tie. It depends. It depends on the night. But she surely doesn't miss. That's for sure. And it's always a good time to go over and operate your layout. What would you say what do you think is your strongest skill in the hobby?
I would say my strongest skill in the hobby would be, operations. Sort of being able to go into a layout and look at it and get a rough idea of what you would be looking at for operating, as far as what trains could, how you could run the trains and where the trains could go, what work they would do there. I definitely have a huge interest in that. That's probably one of my most interesting things that I find in the hobby. And second to that would probably be the ability to have a CTC panel, some type of thing on a computer. That's probably another strong point. You're building the panels and I'm not really a computer geek by any stretch of the imagination either. I'm not really computer savvy, but the CATS program is just like so easy, and everybody looks at it and says, man, that must have taken you forever. And really it doesn't. It's really a pretty simple program to use. And I enjoy that too, because I enjoy that part of it, being able to see the layout on a modern, screen and look like what the BNSF actually has down in Fort Worth, what their dispatchers in the Network Operations Center are seeing, something very similar to what they're looking at. That's pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, and you've done a great job with yours, and you've got that done, and then you've helped Don get his done down in Florida. You haven't, being able to take that knowledge that you picked up from doing there, and I know you help with Tony Donatelli's as well.
Yeah,
with that ability to either dispatch locally or remotely.
Yeah,
kind of that same way.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's a neat part of it. And dispatching Don's like for the first time. Like I don't know what it was, a month ago or so. Was pretty cool, because it's always been, he's dispatching mine, and then to finally get his panel all squared away and get his signals, because he had to put some signals in and everything else, and then finally get him to that point, and then just to, button up the panel, make the panel, fully operational, and get everything figured out, all the little glitches and little things we had to go through, but get everything working and then actually dispatch it. That was a lot of fun. We had a good time and everything went pretty well. There's a few little things here or there we could make some improvements on, but it was a good time. And I think the guys had a good time down there, watching signals change and just going by signal indication. It's a lot easier, to say, go from, control point, 1 to control point 15 or whatever, and they just run between those 2 points. But when guys, you have to signal it and keep track of where everybody is and everything. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy that part of it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun for, to dispatch, to be on that side. It's also fun as an operator because you're really, what we're trying to do is a simulation. And the more that you can get closer to that simulation, the more enjoyable it seems, at least for me, that you feel like you're actually doing it. You're moving freight. You're doing these things, and having dispatching there is that control and that added realism to the whole thing.
Oh yeah, it definitely changes it. And it's funny. I dispatch on my layout, or I dispatch Don's or whatever, and in the back of my mind, I got a guy sitting at a red, and it's in my mind. I'm like, I can't delay this guy. There's a train. He's got to get moving. And it's like, it's just a model. But you still have that in your head that you got to try to keep things fluid and everything moving, and just as a real dispatcher would, and of course, like I said, it is a model in the end, but you still try to make it as real as possible to try to, control things as real as possible.
Yeah. Again, we've got, it's the physical version of a simulation, no more than if I was to fire up Steam and play a, train simulator game.
Right.
It's the same thing. We're simulating it. We just can physically touch what we're simulating, and you want to be as close to real. Again, I think our group has a really good mentality about that. It's not so strict that, we're rivet counting on each other.
Right.
By the way, I had to explain that term to an outsider, what rivet counting was, because I mentioned it on a few podcasts. So, making sure I clear that up for them, basically guys that, really are so intense about it. And hey, it's good to have that intensity, but, there's also, we got to remember where we are too.
Yeah. You can be over the top. I've been to, several national conventions. I was out at Seattle. I've been to Salt Lake City. Like I said, I did the Boston convention. I've been to several of the nationals, and I can't remember whose layout was, what convention it was, but I operated at one layout, and the gentleman that had the layout, and this is just the way he ran it, but it was like you couldn't talk. He didn't want you talking between each other because he said, you're in this train and he's in that train, so you guys could never communicate. The only way you'd be able to communicate is by phone. It was a timetable train order, and he says, so you guys, I don't want anybody talking, back and forth. And it was like, it's like, yeah, that's a little over the top.
Our group would be in a lot of trouble over that rule, wouldn't it?
You have to have fun too. It's right. A hobby, and you have to be able to ratchet it back a little bit. But by the same token, I don't want to see somebody, grab a throttle and, crank a train, turn the throttle up and go, 60 miles an hour around. And that's why, I've limited the speed. You help me with the speed matching to try to prevent stuff like that, because there's nothing any more unrealistic than somebody flying around the railroad like the old, like my old 4x8 sheet in my bedroom when I was 13 years old or 12 years old,
Right. And then they're going to go around the corner and rock off and,
Yeah, when you're damaging, an $80 freight car or something rolling down the embankment,
Yeah, no, we don't want that for sure. It's funny you bring back up speed matching, and I wanted to mention to you, you talked about, what you feel good about the hobby. And I know you said you're not a computer geek, but you certainly seem to enjoy it, because my deal was I was going to come over and speed match your locomotives. And I came over and we had one night, we were messing around. We were trying to figure out what exactly you needed, and we did that. And then the next night I came over and we went through it. And then I think it was like a couple days or 3-4 days later, you're like, oh, I got a whole bunch of them done. I'm like, oh, what am I supposed to do? So you kind of, but no, it's I can tell that's, kind of the, enjoyable to you, that side of the hobby.
Yeah, I enjoy, and I guess from that perspective, I was just, I wanted to get it done, and everything else. And, I do find it interesting, some of the things you're able to do, and the way especially the way that the computer software today is. It makes it so simple. I mean, it's not like there's you need some kind of degree in something to figure this stuff out. It's so easy now. And the way you showed me, and you explained it, and once I understood the concept that you provided, it was like, yeah, I could do this. I mean, I don't have to bug Ray all the time to come over, to do this. I can get this figured out.
Yeah, and it was, and again, you talk about the good group of guys. I learned from Don Iris. Don Iris taught me. I teach you, and then now I'm kind of working with Tony Donatelli and teaching him a little bit, and we've changed things around a little bit on that. But nonetheless, we're all learning from and through each other, and it just really makes it for a really great group.
Absolutely. I think, like you said before, we all bring something different to the table.
Yep.
And, we all have our, strong points, and we all have definitely our weak points, and if we can just continue to work and help each other. And I think we have that philosophy and that mindset that we just want to go out and help each other and make each other's layouts as good as they can be.
What's really neat is right now we have in the group, we have 4 on the normal rotation. Then we have a couple that are kind of waiting in the wings, and we're waiting for them too, because we really want to see them come online and do some more ops. But right now we have 4 layouts, and 2 of them are small, myself and Mike King, and then we have 2 pretty similar in size with you and Tony, and we kind of rotate in and out of those. So it's really neat. We kind of get the best of both worlds. We get to work in a small switching environment, then we get to do some long haul. We get to drag some coal through West Virginia, and then we get to drag some coal through Montana. So, and a whole bunch more. So what would you say is your favorite part of your layout?
I would say the favorite part of my layout is the switching area at Columbia Falls. I really, and it's like I said, it's almost 100% proto freelance. It's basically a large Plum Creek lumber, which unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. Weyerhaeuser bought them, and then Weyerhaeuser closed the lumber mill there. But proto freelance Plum Creek still has the sawmill there, and I've always liked that because the trains go up there, and it's like that same philosophy I said. If I ever downsize, going to like a steel mill, you go up there and you have center beams, and you have bulkheads, and you have the sawdust hoppers, and you have the box cars for the plywood, and you have all these different cars, log cars, and you have all these different things that you got to put in, and sort out on all these different tracks and do all your pickups and set outs and everything. And that job, if you go up on that job, that'll take you, a good operator will take you 2.5 hours. It'll take you almost a whole session just to complete that job. And I've always, any layouts I've gone to, I've always appreciated those jobs where you just sort of go off into your own little world in this little section of the layout, and you just work that area. That's sort of my favorites on any layout I go to, just to be in one little area, sort of unbothered by the through traffic. You're off the main and you're just doing your thing. And so I would say that's probably one of my favorite parts of my layout as far as operationally. But I do enjoy the through trains, just going through the scenery. And the top level is basically 100% scenic. The lower level is just starting. And running a nice, through freight, running it from Shelby down to Spokane, it just gives you, a neat feel to go through all that different scenery. And, it reminds me of being out there, and seeing the different scenes as I go through them. And so that's a part I like too. That's fun. I like to run the Amtrak Empire Builder or something like that, and you go through and you get to see that. So that through train is a good part too. But the switching is definitely my favorite.
Yeah, you've definitely in your operation plan, you've covered both bases, which is really cool. And you can do some local switching, and if you don't want to go a long run, there's plenty of towns right outside of the yard that you can do some local switching with. Or if you want to take a big train out and run it, you have that opportunity as well. So you've got it really covered in both bases, and that's really super cool to go to in a layout that can do both.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ray. That's what I really strive to do too, because, and everybody's got a different skill level, and everybody's got a different interest. And some guys want to come over, and some guys are into passenger trains. They want to run a passenger train. So I have the Empire Builder, that just runs, it could actually run two directions. I run it just one direction, but you can actually reverse it, run it back. And then I do have, all different types of through trains. I have, an ethanol train. I have the coal trains. I have the trailer train. I have the, intermodals. I've got the good mix of different types of trains. And then, even the switching levels. If a guy's really, sort of new at switching, I've got some pretty easy switching jobs. It's just a couple of, industries to go back and forth, maybe, facing point, trailing point, a little bit of run around or whatever. And then I do have some bigger jobs. Whitefish job is a pretty big job. Columbia Falls is a big job. They both take a good amount of time to get done. So it's like when I built it, I really wanted to sort of hit all those high points that everybody's interests are different. And I wanted to make sure I sort of covered that because, even though it's my layout and, you say, lone wolf or whatever, that's how it started. But then once I got into operations, I was like, when I have guys come over here, I want them to have a good time. I want them to be interested. I want them to be into the layout. I want it to run well, and I want them to have fun. I want them to have a good time. So, you sort of build your layout sometimes a little bit for other people too, in a lot of different ways. You really try to, so it's entertaining, it's a good time.
Well, I can attest that we all have a great time in between waiting for Susan's snacks. So so
that helps.
That helps. No, it all helps. No, it's a great layout, and certainly one to be seen by anybody that gets an opportunity to do so. It's great that you open it up for the regional event, and I'm sure other events will come along as well where people are going to be able to come up and see it. And you've done a good job with covering it on social media as well. We'll share those links out so folks can check that out, including the track plan that I just got from Joe Mammy. We'll share that out as well so people can see what kind of visually what we're talking about as well.
Great.
So I want to wrap it up here. Before I do, talk a little bit about what's next for the BNSF Montana division.
Well, what's next for me is working on that scenery, getting that stuff done on the first level. There's some pretty significant areas down there that I got to try to get done. You always have these benchmarks in your head, what you really want to reach. And, I said before the convention, I wanted to have the top done, scenery done, and then I want to have the bottom closed in. I was able to meet that benchmark, and now I guess I have to have some other kind of event to push me, So I got to set something on a calendar and sort of stick to it. But I would definitely like to get that good part of that first level, that lower level of scenery done, and because it'd be nothing more fun to me than to have that done, and then I could sort of go back to these scenes and start to super detail them and come up with a lot of different things. All the little things that Scotty's Model Shop offers and Mac Rail offers. I've done very little weathering. I've done very little detailing of locomotives. I bought a lot of stuff from like Mac Rail and stuff to detail my locomotives. So that's another area I really want to go into. But I just feel that I have to get the layout done. I have to get that scenery done, and make sure everything keeps operating well, and get there first, and then I'll start delving into that. And that's when I'll need help. The weathering and some of that other stuff that other people have some skills where they've already started doing that I really haven't done much of that. So.
It'll definitely help that we've got a great group of guys that have all dove into those types of projects, and will be able to and are willing to share that talent with all of us.
Yeah, that'll be great. That'll be good.
So, Mark, thank you for coming on Around the Layout. It was great talking with you and catching up, and we'll definitely have you back with more updates. I mean, we could probably talk for another 2 hours about the BNSF Montana division. There's a lot there, but we'll definitely have you back, and we'll learn more about it.
Well, thank you, Ray, for having me, and I appreciate that. And I was looking forward to being on and just, letting people know what the BNSF Montana division has to offer and what we've done there. So, and it's like I say, because a lot of people have contributed to that. So it's a joint effort in a lot of ways.
Excellent.
Thanks, Ray.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. You'll find more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Learn more about the show and check out past and future episodes on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks again for hanging out with us around the layout.